Hi, I'm Zongbin. Back in high school, I thought I knew what counted as normal. Classes, announcements, student leadership, trying to keep everyone in one piece. Pretty standard, right? But then one day, a classmate pulled me aside and told me something that made me stop. She said very quietly, I was born into the Unification Church, and one day, I may have to marry someone chosen for me. I remember thinking, wait, what? A religion can decide something that personal? That moment stayed with me, because it turned religion from something abstract in the textbook into something deeply real. So today, I want to ask 3 simple questions. What is the Unification Church? Where is it centered? And why has it become so controversial? Let's start with place. If you search for the Unification movement today, one location keeps coming up, Gapyeong in Gyeonggi province. Although the movement began in South Korea in the 1950s, Gapyeong has become one of its most important religious centers. It is not just an office location, it functions as a sacred headquarters space, a pilgrimage site, and a ceremonial hub. This is where you find major church facilities such as training centers, worship spaces, and large venues for events and blessing ceremonies. So if you imagine the movement as having a spiritual home base, Gapyeong is one of the strongest answers. At the same time, Seoul also matters. Historically, the movement was founded there, and all the headquarters activity remained connected to church spaces in the city. So the religious is not centered on just one holy point. It works through both Gapyeong as a sacred center and Seoul as a historical base. Now, how big is it? That sounds like an easy question, but actually it's not. The movement is clearly global and is reported to exist in more than 100 countries, but exact membership numbers are heavily disputed. Church-linked sources have often claimed very large numbers, sometimes in the millions, but outside observers and journalists have repeatedly pointed out that official claims and active participation are not the same thing. So the safest academic answer is this. The Unification Church has global reach, but its real size is difficult to verify. Now let's talk about the 2 names you absolutely need to know, Son Myung-moon and Hak Ja-han. Son Myung-moon was born in 1920 in what is now North Korea. According to church teaching, he experienced a vision of Jesus as a teenager and later founded the movement in 1954. Followers came to see him not just as a pastor, but as someone with a world historical mission. And then there is Hak Ja-han. She's not just a founder's wife in some secondary role. In the movement, she became a central sacred figure in her own right. After Moon's death in 2012, she emerged as the main leader of the Family Federation and is revered by followers as a true mother. So if Moon built a movement, Han became the figure who had to keep it alive and redefine it after him. So what did he actually believe? The core context of the movement is called the divine principle, and this is where the main theology comes from. At the center of that theology is a very specific claim. God's original purpose was to create not just good individuals, but an ideal family. A family without sin, centered completely on divine love. But according to Unification theology, that ideal never happened. Why? Because of the fall. And here's where the interpretation becomes very different from mainstream Christianity. In many Christian traditions, the fall is understood mainly as disobedience. By the Unification thought, the fall is connected to corrupted love, broken family order, and the creation of a fallen human lineage. In other words, the problem is not just that people do bad things, the problem is that human history itself began in the wrong relational and spiritual condition. That leads to the view of Jesus. In mainstream Christianity, Jesus is a complete saviour. But in Unification theology, Jesus completes the spiritual salvation, yet the mission of restoring the ideal family remained unfinished. Why? Because he was crucified before establishing a God-centered marriage and family on earth. So in this framework, history still needed completion. And this is exactly where Son Myung-moon and Hak Ja-han come in. Followers see them as the true parents, the couple sent to restore what humanity lost and to model the ideal family and history failed to achieve. So salvation here is not only about personal faith or forgiveness, it is about being reconnected to restore lineage and a new family order. That is why family is everything in this movement. If you want the shortest summary possible, it is this. God wanted a perfect family. Humanity fell away from that plan, and the true parents are believed to reopen the way back. So compared with many other religions, the Unification Church makes family not just more important, but the very center of cosmic history. And that one idea explains a lot of what we see next, especially its rituals. So that's what they believe. Now, let's see what that looks like in practice. When most people hear Unification Church, they immediately think of one thing, mass weddings. And honestly, that reaction makes sense. Because in this movement, the most famous ritual is the blessing ceremony, a marriage ceremony that is not treated as just a private romantic event, but as a sacred act of restoration. Britannica even identifies the church as being especially known for these mass weddings. The process involves several stages. First, there is the matching or confirmation of a spouse. Then comes education and preparation. One important symbolic step is the holy wine ceremony, which is associated with purification and a change of lineage. After that comes the public blessing ceremony itself, the part that gets photographed, filmed, and remembered. And it does not end here. There are also follow-up rites, including periods of preparation and symbolic ceremonies that frame marriage not just as a legal union, but as a religious reset. So in this tradition, marriage is not simply about love between two people. It is about fixing history, restoring family, and entering what believers see as a God-centered lineage. Now, here's what things get even more interesting and much more controversial. If the earlier sections show us the Unification Church as a religious movement, the contemporary story shows us something bigger, a movement trying to survive as religion, institution, brand, and power network all at once. First, there is this issue of visibility. In South Korea especially, the movement's presence has often extended far beyond worship. It has been associated with schools, media organizations, businesses, cultural institutions, and international networks. So for many critics, the issue is not just what church believes, it is how deeply it has embedded itself into ordinary life. That is why people sometimes say the movement feels less like just a church and more like a whole ecosystem. Second, there is the issue of division inside the movement. You might expect that after the founder died, leadership will smoothly pass on, but that is not what happened. After Sun Myung-moon's death in 2012, different members of the Moon family and related organizations pushed different visions of the future. In other words, the movement did not simply continue, it fractured. So the question became, who really carries the founder's authority, and who gets to define the true legacy of the movement? And third, there's the biggest challenge of all, public legitimacy. In Japan, public scrutiny exploded after the 2022 assassination of former Prime Minister Shinzo Abe. When anger over the church's donation practices and family harm entered national debate, that scrutiny did not disappear, it escalated. A Tokyo court ordered the Japanese branch dissolved in March 2025, and the Tokyo High Court upheld that dissolution in March 2026. That is not a small scandal, but it's a direct legal challenge to the movement's right to operate normally. In South Korea, the pressure has been political. In 2025, Park Jae-han was questioned, and later faced detention and trial over bribery allegations connected to former First Lady Kim Kang-hee. The church denied wrongdoing, but the case intensified a public image that the movement is entangled not only with faith, but also with money, lobbying, and influence. Yet despite all these divisions, scandals, and criticisms, the Unification Church has not simply disappeared. Its influence is already deeply rooted in everyday life through schools, media, business, culture, and global networks, sometimes visibly and sometimes almost invisibly. That is why it is difficult to see this movement as something temporary or insignificant. Instead, it has already established itself as an influential religious community not only in Korea, but also on a global scale, and its presence is likely to continue in the future.